Hey readers, we are here for Read Aloud, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, yesterday we finished chapter 2 and started chapter 3, so today we're gonna hopefully finish chapter 3. Remember that Jacob and his dad got to the island and they figured out, we really read a lot about like the setting of the island and what it looked like. So I'm feeling that the setting of the island is going to be pretty important because the author took a really long time to describe that for us. So maybe the setting will come back in later, not really sure, but I think that it was important for us to know. So shall we get started? Let's go. All right. Jet-lagged and exhausted, we went to sleep early, or rather we went to our beds and lay in them, with pillows covering our heads to block out the thumping I'm going to say cacophony? Cacophony? Gonna have to look that word up really quick, you guys. Here we go. See, even teachers have to look up words. Probably some of you are reading this being like, Miss McMullen, I know that word. But unfortunately, you're not here with me. Cacophony, maybe?
Cacophony.
I got it, cacophony, and it means a harsh mixture of sounds. Cacophony, new word. Alrighty, that's why I love reading. Okay. Covering our heads to block out the thumping cacophony that issued through the floorboards, which grew so loud that at one point I thought surely the revelers had invaded my room. Then the clock must have struck 10 because all at once the buzzing generators outside sputtered and died, as did the music from downstairs. And the streetlight that had been shining through my window. Suddenly, I was cocooned in silent, blissful darkness, with only the whisper of distant waves to remind me where I was. Remember that everything on the island turns off at 10 o'clock, so that's how he's realizing what time it is. For the first time in months, I fell into a deep, nightmare-free slumber. I dreamed instead about my grandfather as a boy, about his first night here, a stranger in a strange land, under a strange roof, owing his life to people who spoke a strange tongue. When I awoke, sun streaming through my window, I realized it wasn't just my grandfather's life that Miss Peregrine had saved, but mine too, and my father's. Today, with any luck, I would finally get to thank her. I went downstairs to find my dad already bellied up to a table, slurping coffee and polishing his fancy binoculars. Just as I sat down, Kev appeared bearing 2 plates loaded with mystery meat and fried toast. I didn't know you could fry toast, I remarked, to which Kev replied that there wasn't a food he was aware of that couldn't be improved by frying. Over breakfast, Dad and I discussed our plan for the day. It was to be a kind of scout, to familiarize ourselves with the island. We'd scope out my dad's bird-watching spots first, and then find the children's home. I scarfed my food, anxious to get started. Well fortified with grease, we left the pub and walked through town, dodging tractors and shouting to each other over the din of generators, until the streets gave way to fields, and the noise faded behind us. It was a crisp and blustery day, the sun hiding behind giant cloud banks, only to burst out moments later and dapple the hills with spectacular rays of light, and I felt energized and hopeful. We were headed for a rocky beach where my dad had spotted a bunch of birds from the ferry. I wasn't sure how we would reach it, though. The island was slightly bowl-shaped, with hills that climbed towards its edges, only to drop off at precarious seaside cliffs. But at this particular spot, the edge had been rounded off, and a path led down to a minor spit of sand along the water. So they're going first to kind of look and see where the birds are, so his dad knows, and then they said that next they would go to the home, the children's home. So that's where they are right now. They're on the beach looking at all of the birds. We picked our way down to the beach, where what seemed to be an entire civilization of birds were flapping and screeching and fishing in tide pods. My email is going crazy right now. Tide pool, not tide pods. I don't know why I said that. Tide pools. I watched my father's eyes widen. Fascinating, he muttered, scraping at some petrified guano. with the stubby end of his pen. I'm going to need some time here. Is that all right? I'd seen this look on his face before, and I knew exactly what some time meant. Hours and hours. Then I'll go find the house by myself, I said. Not alone you aren't, you promised. Then I'll find a person who can take me. Who? Kev will know someone. My dad looked out to see where a big rusted lighthouse jutted up from a pile of rocks. You know what the answer would be if your mom was here, he said. My parents had differing theories about how much parenting I required. Mom was the enforcer, always hovering, but Dad hung back a little. He thought it was important that I make my own mistakes now and then. Again, also, letting me go would free him to play with Guano all day. Okay, he said, but make sure you leave me the number of whoever you go with. Dad, nobody here has phones, he sighed. Right, well, as long as they're reliable. They don't know anyone on the island, so how could he know if anyone was reliable? Okay, another break. So remember that breaks are either like a change of setting or a change of time. All right. Kev was out running an errand, and because asking one of his regulars to chaperone me seemed like a bad idea, I went into the nearest shop to ask someone who was at least gainfully employed. The door read fishmonger. I pushed it open to find myself cowering before a bearded giant in a blood-soaked apron. He left off decapitating fish to glare at me, dripping cleaver in hand, and I vowed never to discriminate against the intoxicated. So this isn't like an actual giant, it's just like a big man, so a normal-looking man. We're not to the monsters yet, so don't mistake this, okay? But it's like a large guy that he's calling a giant. What for? He growled when I told him where I wanted to go. Nothing over there but bogland and balmy weather. I explained about my grandfather and the children's home. He frowned at me, then leaned over the counter to cast a doubtful glance at my shoes. I suppose Dylan ain't too busy to take you, he said, pointing his cleaver at a kid about my age who was arranging fish in a freezer case. Well, you'll be wanting proper footwear. Wouldn't do to let you go in them trainers. Mud'll suck 'em right off. Really? I said. Are you sure? Dylan, fetch our man here a pair of Wellingtons. The kid groaned and made a big show of slowly closing the freezer case and cleaning his hands before slouching over to a wall of shelves packed with dry goods. Just so happened we got some good sturdy boots on offer, the fishmonger said. Buy one, get none free. He burst out laughing and slammed his cleaver on a salmon, its head shooting across the blood-slicked counter to land perfectly in a little guillotine bucket. Wow. I fished the emergency money Dad had given me from my pocket, figuring that a little extortion was a small price to pay to find the woman I'd crossed the Atlantic to meet. I left the shop wearing a pair of rubber boots so large my sneakers fit inside, and so heavy it was difficult to keep up my begrudging guide. So, do you go to school on the island? I asked Dylan, scurrying to catch up. I was generally curious. What was living here like for someone my age? He muttered the native of a town on the mainland. What is that, an hour each way by ferry? Yup. And that was it. He responded to further attempts at conversation with even fewer syllables, which is to say, none. So I finally gave up and followed him. On the way out of town, we ran into one of his friends, an older boy wearing a blinding yellow tracksuit and fake gold chains. He couldn't have looked more out of place on Cairnholm if he'd been dressed like an astronaut. He gave Dylan a fist bump and introduced himself as Worm. It's really funny. Side note, Harper found a worm outside the other day, and she calls him Herm because she can't really say the W sound. So, yeah, we'll go outside and be like, where's Herm? Side note, has nothing to do with that, but just made me think of it. So this guy's introducing himself as Worm. Do you think that's his real name? I'm going to say no. Worm? It's his stage name, Dylan explained. We're the sickest rapping duo in Wales, Worm said. I'm MC Worm, and this is Sturgeon Surgeon, a.k.a. MC Dirty Dylan, a.k.a. MC Dirty Business, Cairnholm's #1 beatboxer. Want to show this yank how we do it, Dirty D? Dylan looked annoyed. Now? Drop some next-level beats, son. Dylan rolled his eyes, but did as he was asked. At first, I thought he was choking on his tongue, except there was a rhythm to his sputtering coughs. Yeah, I'm a really good rapper, huh? Over which Worm began to rap. I likes to get wrecked up down at Priest Hole. Your dad's always there 'cause he's on the dole. My rhyme is tight, yeah, make it look easy. Dylan's beats are hot like chicken gel frizzy. Dylan stopped. That don't even make sense, he said. Oh, I'm sure you guys are getting a lot of laughs at me right now. That don't even make sense, he said. And it's your dad who's on the dole. Oh, Dirty D let the beat drop. Worm started beatboxing while doing a passable robot, his sneakers twisting holes in the gravel. Take the mic, D. Dylan seemed embarrassed but let the rhymes fly. I met a tight bird and her name was Sharon. She was keen on tracksuit and the trainers I was wearing. I showed her the time like Doctor Who. I thunk up this rhyme while I was in the loo. Worm shook his head. The loo? I wasn't ready. They turned to me and asked what I thought. Considering that they didn't even like each other's rapping, I wasn't sure what to say. I guess I'm more into music with like singing and guitars and stuff. Worm dismissed me with a wave of his hand. He would know a dope rhyme if it bit him in the buttocks, he muttered. Dylan laughed and they exchanged a series of complex, multi-stage handshake, fist bump, high fives. Can we go now? I said. They grumbled and dawdled a while longer, but pretty soon we were on our way, this time with Worm tagging along. I took up the rear, trying to figure out what I would say to Miss Peregrine when I met her. I was expecting to be introduced to a proper Welsh lady and sip tea in the parlor and make polite small talk until time seemed about right to break the bad news. I'm Abraham Portman's grandson, I would say. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but he's been taken from us. Then, once she'd finished quietly dabbing away tears, I would ply with her with questions. I followed Dylan and Worm along a path that wound through the pastures of grazing sheep before a long, busting ascent up a ridge. At the top hovered an embankment of rolling, snaking fog so dense it was like stepping into another world. It was truly biblical. A fog I could imagine God in one of his lesser wraths cursing the Egyptians with. As we descending on the other side, it seemed to thicken. The sun faded to a pale white bloom. Moisture clung to everything, beating on my skin and dampening my clothes. The temperature dropped. I lost Worm and Dylan for a moment, and then the path flattened, and I came upon them standing, waiting for me. I think it's interesting right now to notice something about the setting. It's changing a little bit right now. It's still rocky and hilly, but it's getting really, really foggy. And notice how he said it felt like he was stepping into another world, although he's not. He's still on this island, but it's really, really foggy. So it feels weird right now. Yank boy, Dylan called, this way. I followed obediently. We abandoned the path to plow through a field of marshy grass. Sheep stared at us with big, leaky eyes, their wool soggy and tails drooping. A small house appeared out of the mist. It was all boarded up. Ooh, we got a house. A small house appeared, but it was boarded up. You sure this is it? I said. It looks empty. Empty? No way. There's loads of stuff in there, Worm replied. Go on, said Dylan. Have a look. I had a feeling it was a trick, but stepped up to the door and knocked anyway. It was unlatched and opened a little at my touch. It was too dark to see inside, so I took a step through, and to my surprise, down, into what looked like a dirt floor, but I quickly realized it was in fact a shin-deep ocean of excrement. This tenantless hovel, so innocent looking from the outside, was really a makeshift sheep stable. Oh my God, I squealed in disgust. Peals of laughter exploded from outside. I stumbled backwards through the door before the smell could knock me unconscious and found the boys doubled over, holding their stomachs. You guys are mean, I said, stomping the muck off my boots. Why? Worm said. I got in Dylan's face. Are you going to show me the house or not? He's serious, said Worm, wiping the tears from his eyes. Of course I'm serious. Dylan's smile faded. I thought you were taking the piss, mate. Taking the what? Joking like. Well, I wasn't. The boys exchanged an uneasy look. Dylan whispered something to Worm. Worm whispered something back. Finally, Dylan turned and pointed up the path. If you really want to see it, he said. Keep going past the bog and through the woods. It's a big old place. You can't miss it. What? You're supposed to go with me. Worm looked away and said, this is as far as we go. Why? It just is. And they turned and began to trudge back the way we'd come, receding into the fog. I weighed my options. I could tuck tail and follow my tormentors back to town, or I could go ahead alone and lie to Dad about it. After 4 seconds of intense deliberation, I was on my way. So what just happened was they took him to like a boarded up old house, and when he went into it, he looked down and it was full of excrement, which is poo, and he realized where they had taken him was like a sheep farm, and that this house was now just being used for like a place for sheep to go, like a barn almost. And he realized that Dylan and Worm had kind of like pranked him and pretended like that was the house he was asking for, but it really wasn't. It was kind of it was a prank. So they're saying like the house that you want to go to is over there, but we're not going to go there. They're not saying why. So now Jacob is left there thinking to himself, do I lie to my dad and go, or do I kind of give up and go back to the town with Dylan and Worm? So the last thing that we read was I was on my way. So we don't really know right now where he's going. So my timer just went off. So it's been about 15 minutes, but you know what, guys, we're almost done with this chapter. So I'm going to keep reading. So if you have a couple minutes to keep with me, stay with me. Okay. We're going to finish this chapter. All right, here we go. A vast lunar bog stretched away into the mist from either side of the path, just brown grass and tea-colored water, as far as I could see, featureless, but for the occasional mound of piled-up stones. Okay, so it seems like he's going. He's not going back to the town. Okay, let me check my computer really quick and make sure it's still alive. Okay, still got some time. It ended abruptly at a forest of skeletal trees, branches spindling up like the tips of wet paintbrushes, and for a while the path became so lost beneath fallen trunks and carpets of ivy that navigating it was a matter of faith. So the trail is definitely not one that is commonly used because it's full of ivy and just kind of grown over. So this is a place that people don't go, we can assume as the reader. I was wondering how an elderly person like Miss Peregrine would ever be able to negotiate such an obstacle course. She must get deliveries, I thought, though the path looked like it hadn't seen a footprint in months, if not years. I scrambled over a giant trunk slick with moss, and the path took a sharp turn. The trees parted like a curtain, and suddenly there it was, cloaked in fog, looming atop a weed-choked hill, the house. I understood at once why the boys had refused to come. He's there. My grandfather had described it 100 times, but in his stories, the house was always a bright, happy place, big and rambling, yes, but full of light and laughter. What stood before me now was no refuge for monsters, but a monster itself, staring down from its perch on the hill with vacant hunger. Trees burst forth from broken windows, and skins of scabrous vine gnawed at the walls like antibodies attacking a virus, as if nature itself had waged war against it. But the house seemed unkillable, resolutely upright, despite the wrongness of its angles and the jagged teeth of the sky visible through sections of collapsed roof. So he's describing the house right now as a monster. It's not a monster. Keep that in mind. It's not a monster. He's just using these really vivid details to describe it. So we see that trees are broken into the windows. There's vine all over it, and the roof is collapsed. So surely Miss Peregrine does not live there. So not be a good place to live. I tried to convince myself that it was possible someone could still live there, run down as it was. Such things weren't unheard of where I came from. A falling down wreck on the edge of town, curtains permanently drawn that would turn out to have been home to some ancient recluse who'd been surviving on raiment and toenail clippings since time immemorial. Although no one realizes it until a property appraiser or an overly ambitious censor taker barges in to find the poor soul returning to dust in a lazy boy. People get too old to care for a place, Their family writes them off for one reason or another. It's sad, but it's happened. It happens. Which meant, like it or not, that I was going to have to knock. So he's still kind of convincing himself, she might live there. Let's go knock on the door. I gathered what scrawny courage I had and waded through the high-waisted weeds to the porch, all broken tile and rotted wood, to peek through a cracked window. All I could make out through the smeared glass were the outlines of furniture, so I knocked on the door and stood back to wait in the eerie silence, tracing the shape of Miss Peregrine's letter in my pocket. I'd taken it along in case I needed to prove who I was, but as a minute ticked by, then two, it seemed less and less likely that I would need it. Climbing down into the yard, I circled the house looking for another way in, taking the measure of the place, but it seemed almost without measure, as though with every corner I turned, the house sprouted new balconies and turrets and chimneys. Then I came around back and saw my opportunity, a doorless doorway, bearded with vines, gaping and black, an open mouth waiting to swallow me. Just looking at it made my skin crawl, but I hadn't come halfway around the world just to run away screaming at the sight of a scary house. I thought of all the horrors Grandpa Portman had faced in his life, and felt my resolve harden. If there was anyone who could find inside, I would find them. I mounted the crumbling steps and crossed the threshold. So he's going into this house now. He did describe it as like an open mouth waiting to swallow him. Remember, the house is not a real monster right now. He's using that to describe how scary it's looking. Okay, hopefully I can finish before my computer dies. Standing in a tomb dark hallway just inside the door, I stared frozenly at what looked for all the world like skins hanging from hooks. After a queasy moment in, which I imagined some twisted cannibal leaping from the shadows with knife in hand, I realized they were only coats, rotted to rags and green with age. I shuddered involuntarily and took a deep breath. I'd only explored 10 feet of the house and was already about to fall in my underwear. Keep it together, I told myself, and then slowly moved forward, heart hammering in my chest. Each room was a disaster, more incredible than the last. Newspapers gathered in drifts, scattered toys, evidence of children long gone, lay skinned in dust. Creeping mold had turned window-adjacent walls black and furry. Fireplaces were throttled with vines that had descended from the roof and began to spread across the floors like alien tentacles. The kitchen was a science experiment gone terribly wrong. Entire shelves of jarred food had exploded from 60 seasons of freezing and thawing, sputtering the wall with evil-looking stains. The fallen plaster lay so thickly over the dining room floor that for a moment I thought it had snowed indoors. At the end of a light-starved corridor, I tested my weight on a rickety staircase, my boots leaving fresh tracks in layers of dust. The steps groaned as if woken from a long sleep. If anyone was upstairs, they'd been there a very long time. Finally, I came upon a pair of rooms missing entire walls, into which a little forest of underbrush and stunted trees had grown. I stood in a sudden breeze, wondering what possibly could have done that kind of damage, and began to get the feeling that something terrible had happened here. I couldn't square my grandfather's stories with this nightmare house, nor the idea that he'd found refuge here with the sense of disaster that pervaded it. There was more left to explore, but suddenly it seemed like a waste of time. It was impossible that anyone could still be living here, even the most misanthropic recluse. I left the house, feeling like I was further than ever from the truth. And that's the end of chapter 3. So the house is definitely abandoned. No one is living there. It's overgrown with stuff. Can you guys see me right now? There we are. There I am. Okay. It's overgrown. There's trees growing in the rooms. Vines have come down from the chimney and kind of spread out into the rooms. Stuff from the ceiling had fallen down. But he can tell, like, stuff that was in the kitchen has just, like, exploded. It's all over the walls. There's moss growing. No one could possibly live there. So now he's kind of feeling like, well, that was kind of a waste of time. And also I'm further from the truth now because he thought he was going to go to this house, meet Mr. Peregrine, get all the answers to his questions, and then just go on with his life. And clearly that's not going to happen. Okay, we'll start chapter 4 tomorrow. Bye-bye.